Okay, let's start with a bit of a brain bender. How exactly do you translate a metaphor when the words you need literally don't even exist in the language you're translating into? Or, what if the words do exist, but in that specific culture they mean something completely scandalous? That is the exact high-stakes puzzle we're going to be unraveling today.
Welcome to today's Explainer, Translating the Untranslatable, the Cultural Bridge of Language. We're diving headfirst into the really fascinating world of linguistic challenges, cross-cultural communication, and the incredibly delicate art of translation. Because as it turns out, sharing a message across borders, it's way, way more than just swapping words out using a dictionary.
Everything we're unpacking today is grounded in the brilliant academic work of Dr. George Payton. Specifically, we're looking at his really eye-opening session on how figurative language, so things like idioms, metaphors, and euphemisms, cause massive headaches, but also spark some pretty incredible creative breakthroughs for translators all over the globe. All right, here is our roadmap for today. First, the translation tightrope. Then, decoding metaphors and similes. After that, we'll tackle bridging the cultural gap, figure out translating the untranslatable, and finally, wrap up with navigating cultural taboos.
So, Part 1, the translation tightrope and why literal translation so often fails.
You see, words can cross borders pretty easily, but true meaning, that requires a cultural bridge. Dr. Payton explains that our brains actually process language through very specific cultural frames of reference. If you just literally translate words across two completely different cultures, the meaning gets totally lost. It becomes deeply confusing, or it just sounds entirely nonsensical to an outsider. Translation isn't just a simple data transfer. It is literally a profound act of cultural diplomacy.
Which brings us to Part 2, decoding metaphors and similes, the architecture of comparison. Authors use two core tools to create really powerful word pictures. A metaphor is an implied comparison between two things from totally different categories, basically saying something is something else. A simile, on the flip side, is a direct comparison explicitly using words like or as.
To bring this academic concept down to earth, just look at how we use these word pictures every single day. We say things like, John's room is a pigsty, or Jane is a walking encyclopedia. We might call Susan a night owl, or say someone is blind as a bat. These phrases make our communication short, punchy, and incredibly vivid, but only if you're inside the culture that intrinsically understands what a pigsty or a night owl actually implies, right?
Dr. Payton gives us this brilliant three-part mechanical formula for how our brains actually process every single metaphor or simile. First up, there's the topic. That's the primary thing being talked about. Second, the illustration, the picture it's being compared to. And third, the point of similarity, what those two things actually have in common. Honestly, understanding this three-part breakdown is a translator's master key.
Moving on to Part 3, bridging the cultural gap. This is what happens when ancient texts meet entirely new worlds.
This is where the real stakes emerge. Take this famous quote from the ancient text of Isaiah 53:6, "All we like sheep have gone astray." I challenge you to use that three-part formula we just talked about right here. The topic is humans, we. The illustration is sheep. But what exactly is the point of similarity?
Well, for pastoral cultures like the Orma people in Kenya, this metaphor translates effortlessly. They intimately know that sheep are ignorant, they're prone to wander off, and they require constant chasing by multiple herders just to keep them safe. So the lost sheep concept makes perfect, vivid sense to them. But imagine taking this exact phrase to a culture in Papua New Guinea that has never even seen a sheep. Without that shared cultural context, the entire point of similarity completely breaks down.
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the danger of assumptions. Consider the ancient phrase where King Herod is called that fox. Now, as Westerners, we hear fox and immediately think clever, tricky, and sneaky, right? Because of our specific folktales. But Dr. Payton points out that in the original Hebrew culture, a fox was seen as small, poorly built, and totally insignificant. By forcing our modern cultural frame onto an ancient text, we literally reverse the author's intended meaning. So, Part 4, translating the untranslatable. Let's look at the translator's hierarchy of choices.
What do we actually do when things just don't match up? Translators have to rely on a really practical toolkit when they hit a metaphor that simply doesn't exist or make sense in the target language. The first choice is to soften the metaphor into a simile. So instead of saying, "I am your shield," you'd say, "I am like a shield." Second, if that still isn't clear, you just state the similarity explicitly. I protect you like a shield. And finally, if absolutely all else fails, you break down the word picture completely and just communicate the bare meaning. I will continually protect you. The goal is always to keep the poetic word picture if possible, but ultimately, clarity and communication have to win.
All right, part 5. Navigating cultural taboos, the high stakes of propriety.
We've reached the absolute climax of our explainer. To understand taboos, we've got to talk about euphemisms. A euphemism is simply a mild or indirect expression that you substitute for one that's considered way too harsh, blunt, or culturally offensive. This usually involves bodily functions, death, or strict societal norms. And here's the catch. Dr. Payton notes that non-Western cultures often have much stricter rules of propriety than modern American society. A direct translation of a sensitive topic can be overwhelmingly offensive.
So, how do translators actually know if they've crossed the line? Well, Dr. Payton introduces this highly relatable concept called the grandma test. Would you be embarrassed to read this translation out loud to your grandmother? If a literal translation would embarrass you in mixed company or, say, at church, it completely fails the test. The language absolutely must be adjusted to respect the local culture.
Just look at these incredibly vivid, cross-cultural examples of euphemisms in action. In Ghana, if a king dies, you definitely don't say that. You say, the king has traveled. Saying he died directly could literally get you killed for disrespect. In Swahili, if you need the restroom, you soften it by saying, I have a need. Even in the ancient text of 1 Samuel 24, it says, a king covered his feet. That is actually an ancient polite euphemism for relieving himself in a cave, because a long robe covers your feet when you squat down. A translator absolutely has to match the target culture's level of politeness.
Here's a wild example. When translating the literal Hebrew idiom, Adam knew his wife, into the Orma language, translators use the exact literal Orma equivalent for knowing a woman. But they quickly discovered that in the Orma culture, that specific phrase exclusively implies adultery. So a literal translation accidentally made it sound like Adam was having a scandalous affair with his own wife. No way, right? They had to quickly adapt it to slept together, just to preserve the actual meaning without causing a massive accidental scandal.
This brilliantly summarizes the core philosophy of Dr. Payton's entire session. He says, we have to keep in balance accuracy, understandability, clarity, and natural language with acceptability. Excellent translation isn't just about literal word-for-word accuracy. It is fundamentally about honoring the target culture's norms, so the message isn't just technically understood, but actually embraced and accepted by the people hearing it.
Which leaves us with this final, really fascinating thought. How might the invisible cultural bounds of your own daily language, the idioms you use without even thinking, sound entirely alien or even highly offensive to another culture? The next time you speak, take a second to think about those invisible cultural bridges you're building. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.